Welcome to Job Club. I'm Diana Doggett, an Extension Specialist at the University of Kentucky, and we are so glad that you've joined us this morning. I want to remind everyone to locate the chat box and toggle the to icon to everyone. And that's going to enable you to ask questions and present comments throughout our presentation today. And let us know where you're logging in from. We are so interested in where you are, and we want that shout out just as soon as you log in. That would help us a lot. Let us know if you're a job seeker, and if you are, what are you looking for? What type of employment? We will have our agenda today consist of success stories. We will have a main speaker. We'll be sharing active job leads and partner updates, and then we will tell you what to expect next time at Job Club. Our mission is to provide a positive environment for job seekers to network and to learn best practices for the job search. We meet on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month, and you can find the scheduled topics at www.ukalumni.net/job club. So we invite you to visit that website. There was lots of interesting materials there that I will talk about later. This is the Job Club team. You've met me, Diana. Caroline Francis is the Director of Alumni Career Services with the UK Alumni Association. Amanda Shagney is the Assistant Director of Alumni Career Services. Nicole Waite is Employment Specialist at UK STEPS Temporary Employment. And we have Suzanne Smith and Sunny Saylor at the Fayette County office, where we are here in person. So they always help us set up and deliver here, and as well as our great help with Queen Sullivan, Christy Kaufman, and Lindsay Caudell with UK Alumni. We want to remind you that Job Club is currently hosted in a hybrid format. We are in person, as I spoke earlier, at the Fayette County Extension office. We invite anyone in the area to come and be here in person. There's an advantage to that at times. We also are on Zoom webinar. And that means that we have a chat moderator available, again, to listen to your questions, your comments, and you can communicate with us through that chat box. We are also on Facebook Live, view only. We do not have a chat moderator or job lead newsletter that will follow in the aftermath of our presentation. At the website that I mentioned earlier, www.ukalumni.net/job club, you will find a free Job Club resource packet. And within this packet, there are lots of resources that will help you in your job search. Informational interview tips. We have networking opportunities, articles of interest for job seekers, resume review checklists. There's just so many, and we just encourage you to go there because there will probably be something that will enhance your job search. We also want to remind everyone and encourage you to join the Central Kentucky Job Club sharing community on LinkedIn. That site is growing, and we are thrilled that so many of you are linked with us. And it gives us a chance to deliver additional information in the interim between our Job Club presentations on our Tuesdays. So check that out as well. Job Clubs, employers and recruiters are always welcome at Job Club. In-person employer guests may have a 1-minute spotlight to share active job leads with the group later in the program. So if you are one of those that would like to announce a job lead, just raise your hand and we will acknowledge that during that time. Watch your email later today for job leads that have been sent directly to our Job Club team. Some attendees are conducting a confidential job search. So let's please be respectful of their privacy for the job search of others. Check out job search related articles again that are included in our Job Club reminder emails. And we do provide recordings and PowerPoint slides, and they are available again at the website that's on your screen and that I mentioned earlier. So at this time, we want to welcome first-time attendees. We call you first-timers, and I see we have some in our audience here at Fayette Extension. And if you're a first-timer online, would you just signify that in the chat box? And we do want to give you a warm welcome. Later today, you will receive a short survey that will provide us information to place you into our notification system for future programs. You can scan the QR code, or you can and complete that right now, but we will be sending you that email. Success stories. We love to acknowledge anyone that has made progress in their job search to date. So if you have something to share with others that's motivational, it could be an interview, maybe you have revised your resume, you've expanded your network. If any of those things apply, would you just put them in the chat box so that we can show others that there is a road to success, and that includes an array of things to do. Last session, at our last Tuesday that we were here, we had an in-person attendee that was able to do an in-house screening right here in the Fayette County Extension Office. So we deem that as success. We have the right people at the right time. So there's lots of ways to claim a success, and we are encouraged with what you're putting in the chat box. Well, that brings us to today's presentation. We're excited about this. I think we all listen maybe apprehensively to economic news daily and weekly, but we have a real expert here today that's going to give us some insight to just what's happening nationally, statewide. So our speaker is Mike Clark. He is Dr. Mike Clark, Associate Professor of Economics, Director of the Center for Business and Economics Research. Welcome, Mike.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you today. So one of the things I kind of want to start with is just kind of telling you that as you're looking for a job over the next few weeks, you are actually coming into one of the best labor markets that we've seen in a really long time. I'm going to go through and talk a lot about what's going on in the economy. But one of the things that we're really going to get to is what a tight labor market we have. There is a lot of demand for workers. There are a lot of job openings out there. And so this is a really good time where workers actually have a lot of power to find jobs and maybe to find better jobs that maybe provide higher wages, better benefits, or better working conditions. So with that, let me just kind of make sure I'm controlling the screen here. All right, very good. That was my first kind of hurdle that I was worried about. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through kind of what's going on in the economy. And I've got a lot of slides, a lot of data. You know, that's what economists do. You know, we kind of get buried in the data because it really tells us a pretty important story about kind of what's going on in the economy, where things maybe are strong, where things maybe are weak, and where we might be going in the future. So if you pay any attention to the news whatsoever, or if you own a car or go to the grocery store, and so I think, this, covers just about all of us probably, you are aware that there is an issue in terms of inflation. We talk about inflation, what we're basically talking about is the general prices of the goods and services that we consume or purchase have been going up, and they've been going up at a pretty fast rate. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on with inflation, because that's one of the really big issues right now that's kind of driving how the economy is going to do over the next few months and couple of years. And really, with inflation, being so high, one of the things that's going on is the Federal Reserve is trying to fight inflation. And so we're going to talk about what that means and what that may mean for the actual economy. Generally, what we've seen is that here over the past 6 months or so, economic output nationally has kind of declined a bit. But in spite of that, the labor market does remain very strong. We have a very tight labor market with strong demand for workers. But the employment recovery, we got hit by the pandemic, of course, and we've been recovering ever since. That recovery has been uneven. So kind of the mix of jobs has really changed. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what has been going on in the housing market, because all this kind of fits together in terms of what's going on in the economy. And I'm going to kind of start big, talk about the national economy, and then we'll kind of move in a little bit, talk a lot about the state economy, and we'll talk a little bit about the local economy. Mostly we'll talk about the state. Okay, so starting off with inflation. All right, so inflation, we've been hearing an awful lot about it. It's been a big concern, but just to kind of give you a sense of what's been going on with inflation. We've kind of gotten spoiled over the last 10, 20 years with relatively moderate inflation. Inflation had been running about 2%. It was fairly predictable. It's actually a little bit below 2% prior to the pandemic. It was steady. It was predictable. People could just kind of count on prices rising a little bit gradually over time. But it was fairly easy to kind of plan for. And so, it was not really much of a problem. But when the pandemic hit, a lot of things changed. What really kind of started off with inflation is how the pandemic changed how we consume different types of goods and services. Because you might remember when the pandemic hit and there were a lot of restrictions in place, you couldn't necessarily go to the restaurant that you wanted to go to. You couldn't go to the movie theaters. You couldn't go to a lot of things that maybe you might have spent some of your discretionary money on. And so, some people, as a result of this, they had a little bit extra money in their pocket that they weren't spending on certain types of things that really weren't things that they could access at the time. And so they started shifting over to goods. They could still order things off Amazon. They could still, get, different types of goods. And so since they were kind of stuck in their houses, they began, maybe doing renovations, building their office at home so they could work remotely, and investing in technology so that they could work remotely. And so what this did is it basically kind of shifted our demand from some of these services and entertainment things that we might have been spending on to these other types of goods. And what happened is that kind of drove those prices of those goods up because we were all kind of consuming those different types of things. And manufacturers were trying to produce these things, but with COVID and hitting the labor force, they were struggling to be able to keep up with that demand. And then we started finding problems where, as we were trying to get some of these goods over, maybe from like other countries, we didn't have the workers to maybe move those goods. And so things started to kind of break down in terms of our supply chain. And so that's kind of where inflation really started to kind of crop up. But as we're still kind of feeling the after effects of the pandemic, even as things kind of all the COVID restrictions started to be eased, we started seeing that demand was strong, but supply chains were still disrupted, and that kept prices high. Now, on top of that, we had a lot of stimulus. The government was putting stimulus into the economy in a lot of different ways. A lot of that had to do with stimulus checks that you might have received. And so you had more income to be able to spend more. And so, that may have contributed to inflation as well. As we kind of move on, at the time, we kind of expected that these were just kind of temporary disruptions that it would eventually kind of work out. Supply chains would get fixed, manufacturers would ramp up production, demand would kind of return to normal. But some other things kind of happened. And this is kind of the problem with global economies is you just have things happen. And what ended up happening was Russia invaded Ukraine. And as a result of that, there was a lot of concerns over food and oil. A lot of countries basically decided that, we're not going to purchase gas or oil from Russia. And so when you take Russian oil out of the equation, that means you don't have as much supply, and that puts upward prices on oil. And so what ended up happening is we started seeing gas prices increase as a result of that. And gas prices really are an input into a lot of things. Our oil is an input into a lot of things. And so when those prices go up, it tends to exacerbate the inflation problem that we already are seeing. And so you can see over the past few months, we've been seeing unusually high inflation, up around 8.5% when you look at all different types of items. You take fuel out of that, what you see is that inflation was about 5.9%. But even taking energy and food out, that's a really high rate of inflation compared to what we are used to historically. And so that tends to really eat into the budgets of our households. Now, what we're actually seeing as we kind of move across different types of, kind of working on my controlling of this screen, I'm having some little trouble with it. Okay. We can kind of see how inflation kind of changed across different goods. Energy prices, whether it's oil, natural gas, those have been up substantially, up 33% over where they were a year before. You see commodities, when we think about the different types of goods that we purchase, whether that be electronics or cars, they were up about 6.9%. Services have started to pick up as well, because now people are returning back to kind of their pre-pandemic ways, and they're going back to the movie theaters, the restaurants, and things of that nature. So we're starting to see inflation kind of become more broad-based. It's moving through kind of the different types of goods and services that we consume. So when the Federal Reserve sees these high inflation rates, the Federal Reserve is responsible for kind of managing the economy. And they have what we call a dual mandate. The idea is they want to achieve full employment, but they also have to achieve stable prices. And high inflation is not stable prices. It's the exact opposite of stable prices. So one of the ways they kind of affect inflation, can try to bring that down, is by controlling interest rates. So they have these tools where they can raise interest rates, and these go on to affect interest rates and things that we might take part in, such as mortgage loans or car loans. And so what started happening is, as we moved into the pandemic, they had lowered interest rates substantially to kind of help spur the economy on. But when inflation started to show up, they started raising the interest rates up. And so you can see in this red line here, you can start to see that they have been aggressively pushing those interest rates up. Those interest rates get passed on through the lending sector, and we start to see that mortgage rates, for example, have also increased. So here's 15-year mortgage rates. If you've been out looking for a home, you've probably been frustrated first by the fact that it's hard to find a home. Home prices are expensive. Well, now mortgage rates are going up, and so it's becoming more expensive to borrow money to purchase the home. Well, this affects the economy and inflation, because what the Fed basically is doing here is it's making it more expensive to engage in certain types of purchases. So it's more expensive now to purchase a house. It's more expensive now to borrow money for a car, or to borrow money to fund different types of consumption that you might have or want to engage in. So what ends up happening is you're less likely to spend that money. So that reduces demand and kind of eases inflation. And what it also does is it encourages you to save. So if you've got money and you're thinking, okay, well, I could spend this money and I can get something that I enjoy consuming, or I can put this back and do, what my dad always said, save that money. You can get higher interest rates now by saving that money. And so that's how the Fed goes through and tries to affect inflation. And so what the Fed has been doing is they've been kind of watching these inflation reports every month and seeing how they've been coming out and raising interest rates to kind of try to bring that inflation rate down. And basically they're slowing the economy down. Now, there is some evidence that the economy has been slowing down. One of our big, broad measures of the economy is what we call gross domestic product. And it's basically just the value of all the goods and services that we produce. So this is a national number. We also have state numbers. And you can see that Kentucky's economy tends to follow very closely with the U.S. economy. When the U.S. economy improves, the Kentucky economy improves. When the U.S. economy goes into a recession, we follow suit. What you can see on the right-hand side is the percent change each quarter. And you can see that in the last two quarters, the last 2 quarters for, this past year, I think the last 6 months or so, the GDP for the nation has declined. And so, that's a bit of a contraction. That means that over the last 6 months, we were not producing as much as we had been producing the year before. So that's a signal that the economy has been slowing down a bit. And in this case, actually contracting. Okay, so I'm going to move and start talking about things that I think are really quite a bit more relevant to this group. We're going to start talking about the labor market. And first, I'm going to start off talking about the unemployment rates. So, of course, unemployment really spiked with the pandemic when businesses started shutting down. As we reopened, we started to see that those unemployment rates really started to fall. And if we kind of focus in on kind of the most recent numbers, so here's the same data, but I'm just kind of focusing on the last couple of years. We see that unemployment rates have fallen, and really they've fallen to historic levels. Kentucky's unemployment rate has been achieving kind of historic lows. We've never seen the unemployment rate quite this low before. So for Kentucky, last month it was 3.7%. We had never seen unemployment rates this low before. But we've got to be a little bit careful about kind of interpreting this unemployment rate. When we talk about the unemployment rate, what we're talking about is we basically survey people. The U.S. government goes out and they survey households and they ask about the employment situation of people who are in the household. And based on a series of questions, we group people into 3 categories. If you work and you receive pay, you're considered employed. Now, unemployed is not exactly what you might think. Unemployed is people who do not have a job, but have actively searched for work during the past 4 weeks. If you didn't search for work, even if you might want a job, you're not considered as being unemployed in the official statistics. You're what's called, in this group, called not in the labor force. And not in the labor force, that can consist of a lot of different types of situations. For example, it can be my son who's in college and is investing in his education, and he's not employed because he's taking 18 credit hours a semester in engineering, and so he needs to spend his time studying. Or it can be like my father, who is retired, and he's not in the labor force. And there's probably not a wage that would induce him to get into the labor force. But you also have these people who maybe are not in the labor force, who might want a job, but they're not actively searching for a work. And throughout the pandemic, this has been a lot of different situations. This could be somebody who maybe they wanted to work, but they were having to care for children or elderly parents. This may be people who wanted to work, but they were concerned about the effects of COVID. And so as a result of that, they were not able to get out and search for a job. And so when the pandemic hit, we saw a lot of people leave the labor force for a lot of different reasons. Again, it might be healthcare issues. It might be, taking care of their kids when schools were closed. And basically, these individuals are not counted in the official statistics for unemployment, but they do matter. They're part of the story here. So we've got another measure that we like to look at, and this one's actually pretty important when we are talking about what's going on in the labor force. So we can kind of look at how we're doing by, as an economy, by looking at a couple of different additional measures. One's the employment to population ratio. Basically, how many people in the economy or how many people in our population are actually employed? And what you can see is that as of July, we still hadn't quite got back to the same employment level as where we were prior to the pandemic. The other measure that we look at is the labor force participation rate. And so this is when you think about all the people who are age 16 and over, what percentage of them are actually either employed or unemployed? That is, they're looking for a job. And you can see that really took a dive when the pandemic hit, and it slowly crawled back up, but it's still not back to where it was. So we have fewer people who are out there interested in working. That are, these are people who are participating in the labor force. So this has kind of created kind of a lack of supply. Businesses have been coming back and they've been looking for workers, but there's not been as many people interested in working as there were prior to the pandemic. And so this kind of sets up kind of what's going on in the labor market. Now, I also want to talk about jobs. So we get data from surveying households, but we also like to survey businesses as well. and asked them, well, how many people did you have on payroll? And when the pandemic hit, employment in Kentucky was down about 293,000 jobs, as we lost a substantial number of jobs when the pandemic hit. And we still have not recovered. But we recovered most of those jobs. We recovered or replaced about 94% of those jobs that were lost at the beginning of the pandemic. Here we're looking at kind of how we've done relative to the US as a whole. And you can see we've kind of followed a similar pattern. Basically, where Kentucky is as of July is we are down about 1%. Our employment levels are down about 1% from where they were in January 2020, just before the pandemic. So we're almost there. Nationally, in July, employment had actually gotten back to its pre-pandemic levels. So it recovered all those jobs. We're not quite there, but we're really close. So employers are hiring. And I apologize for this slide because there's a lot of detail there and it's small. And if you're in the audience, you may not be able to see this. But basically what I'm doing is I'm looking across all these different sectors to show how different sectors have been recovering, because the recovery has not been even across each of these different sectors. And so there's a couple that I particularly want to point out. Construction and manufacturing. The dark line is Kentucky, the red line is the US. But if you look at construction and manufacturing employment, you see they're not back to where they were prior to the pandemic. And manufacturing employment in Kentucky has basically kind of gone flat. National manufacturing employment has continued to rise, but we've kind of gone sideways. Construction is kind of the same situation. Construction employment nationally has continued to rise. It's above pre-pandemic levels, but in Kentucky, it's kind of moved kind of sideways with a lot of volatility, but we're not where we were. We're still down about 3.7% from where we were before. But there are some sectors where we're seeing some really strong job growth, and they have actually recovered from where we were prior to the pandemic. Financial activities, professional and business services are all well above where they were prior to the pandemic, and employment is continuing to grow in those sectors. And in Kentucky, it's growing faster than it is in the US. So those are a couple of sectors that really seem to be kind of on fire right now. Trade, transportation, utilities, that's a big group, but it includes all of our retailers. So, Walmart, Target, Amazon, the Amazon Distribution Center would be in there. A lot of those new jobs have basically been retail jobs that have come back as the economy has recovered. Leisure and hospitality, not quite back to where it was, but again, those have been coming back fairly quickly, and there have been a lot of jobs come back in that sector. Okay, so where we kind of, I can't control this very well, but where we were kind of from July 2020 to where we are, January 2020 to where we were in July, just last month, 2 months ago, sorry. How employment has changed. And you can see that really the mix has changed quite a bit. Government employment is down about 29,000 jobs. So pretty substantial decline in government employment. Some of that has to do with school jobs and the seasonality. This is July, so teachers weren't working. Then August numbers might look quite a bit different. We're still down quite a bit in terms of manufacturing. We have about 10,600 fewer manufacturing jobs in Kentucky than we did prior to the pandemic. But if you look at the professional and business services, we're up around 17,500 jobs. Trade, transportation, utilities, we're up 18,600 jobs. So again, really good growth in some of those sectors. I want to give you kind of a sense of what the distribution of employment is across different sectors, US, Kentucky, and Lexington. And Lexington tends to be more similar to the US. But if you kind of think about where our jobs are here in Lexington, we have not as strong of a manufacturing base as maybe Kentucky. Kentucky is known as a manufacturing state. About 13% of Kentucky employment is in manufacturing, and only about 6% of Lexington's employment is manufacturing. Where Lexington tends to be really strong is education and health services. Seems like kind of an odd grouping. Most of that is really healthcare. We tend to be strong in terms of professional and business services. And so, you know, when we kind of look at where the jobs are, a lot of that changes as you move across different geographic areas. So if you're in Lexington, if you're in the Lexington MSA, a lot of healthcare jobs, a lot of professional type jobs. If you're looking in Kentucky, a lot of manufacturing jobs. Okay, so one of the things that's been going on is as the economy recovered, businesses started to see their demand go up. And to meet that demand, they started hiring workers. And so one of the things we watch is number of job openings, both nationally and in the US. And we've been seeing those go up substantially. And so, you know, they have continued to be high, even in the most recent months. Now, if you look at, excuse me, kind of the same type of information, here I'm looking at job openings and hires. Now, this is for the US. We don't have this data for Kentucky, but I suspect we kind of see similar types of things going on. What you can see is kind of where job openings are relative to hires across different sectors. Now, again, remember this is US, but if you look, for example, at manufacturing, that's in the top right-hand section, what you see is that job openings are really, really high relative to hires. Job openings are the blue line. The red is the hires. So there are a lot more openings than what manufacturers are able to fill. And as you move across some of these sectors, you see a lot of the same types of things. The professional and business services, so think architectural firms, law firms, accounting firms. Those sectors have a lot more openings than they are hiring. So what seems to be going on is that they have these vacancies, but they're not able to actually fill them. And so as a result of that, what we're seeing is that these job openings are kind of sticking around, and really businesses across a lot of these different sectors are starting to aggressively compete for workers because, again, strong demand for their services. They want to fill these job openings, but there are few people in the labor force. So this is creating kind of what we call a tight labor market, which is a really good thing for workers. Not so great thing for businesses, but it's a good thing for workers because what tends to happen is you start to see that people start looking for other jobs. And one of the things that kind of came out about this time last year, we made headlines nationally about our quit rates. Kentucky had one of the highest quit rates in the nation. And everybody was kind of scratching their heads. Why is everybody quitting in Kentucky? Well, quits were up all over the place, but it was not because people were just kind of leaving their jobs. It was because people were finding that in this tight labor market, they could find better jobs. And so they were quitting their jobs and they were going on to new jobs. So both quit rates and hire rates were going up. So what was really happening is we just had a lot of turnover in the labor market as people were finding, I'm in this job, it pays this wage, has these working conditions, but there's another employer out there who is willing to maybe pay a higher wage or provide better working conditions. So I have more options as a worker. So this is actually a good thing for the worker's perspective. This has also put upward pressure on wages. So as employers are aggressively competing for workers, what we're starting to see is that they're doing that by increasing their wages. And you can see that, you know, this is a national number, but we seem to be seeing this in Kentucky as well. If you look at private sector workers, and you look at their wages and salaries, they're up about 5.7% relative to where they were a year ago. If you look across different sectors, you see that the wage growth is different across different sectors. On the low side, information, which is kind of like TV, radio, print media, those types of things, wages are up, but they're only up about 4.3%. But if you move over to the other side and look at leisure and hospitality, where we lost a lot of workers, wages in that sector is up 8.2%. Retail sector is up 7.8%. So here we have, again, really strong demand. We don't have as many workers, and so wages are going up for those sectors. But when we think about these wage growth, while they sound really good, we also have to think about them in terms of inflation. Remember, inflation was running about 8.5%. So what seems to be going on is that while we are getting some raises, those raises haven't been keeping up with inflation. And so that means our purchasing power is down. So it's really kind of affecting our budget. Okay, so where is the wage growth occurring, or who seems to be seeing this? We are seeing this across all different age groups. But if you notice on this left-hand side, we're looking at different age groups. Those youngest, 16 to 24, they're experiencing the highest wage growth. Remember, they tend to be the people who are most likely to fill retail jobs and jobs in restaurants, the leisure and hospitality sector, which is where we're seeing the highest wages. So all age groups are seeing upward pressure on their wages, but it seems to be primarily affecting our younger workers. If you look by race, what you also tend to see is that both for whites and non-whites, you're seeing upward pressure. And it's hard to see on this slide, but the wage rates are going up faster for non-whites. And so remember, there's a gap between what whites and non-whites earn. And so that gap has shrunk a little bit in this labor market. So that's an encouraging thing. Okay, not just wage and salaries are going up, but we're seeing that benefits are going up. What employers spend on health insurance is also going up. So again, that's encouraging. And a lot of the benefits, some of that's health insurance, but some of those benefits can be like, retirement plans. And so employers are putting more into those retirement plans as they compete more aggressively for workers. So again, an encouraging thing for our labor market. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about what's going on in the housing market. If you are looking for a house, you've probably been frustrated over the last year. Just kind of give you a sense of what's going on. When the pandemic hit, basically the inventory of houses that were available to be purchased declined substantially. People took their houses off the market. And there's kind of an expectation that there wouldn't be a lot of people buying houses because we were going into a recession with this pandemic. And so production of houses started to slow. But demand for houses actually stayed really strong. So the number of listings or the number of houses that were available for sale really slowed down. And so as a result of, when you don't have very many houses out there and you've got a lot of people looking for houses, the houses started moving really quickly. And if you've talked to anybody looking to buy a house, that they've been going through some really difficult times. They might put in a bid and, it quickly get accepted or it quickly get outbid on the project. Houses were moving an average of about 37 days. This is down substantially from where it was prior to the pandemic. Housing prices are also, of course, have been increasing. Prices have been up around, more than 15% compared to where they were a year ago. And we're seeing the same type of thing both in the US and in Kentucky. So pretty strong housing prices, growth in housing prices. Okay, let me kind of skip over this in the interest of time, and we're going to kind of move on to kind of my last couple of slides. Well, the economy has been really strong. This inflation has kind of has a lot of people spooked. They're feeling the pain, at the gas pumps, at the grocery stores. They're seeing the prices go up, and as a result of that, they're pretty concerned about what the Fed's going to do in terms of increasing interest rates, how that can potentially affect the economy. And so consumer sentiment is down pretty low, really quite a bit lower than it was even during the pandemic. And part of this has to do with the concern that, well, if the Fed increases the interest rates, slow down the economy, could they overdo it? Could they actually push the economy into a recession by slowing it down so much? And so there is some risk of that. That's been a concern. As we kind of look at the economic situation in general, we see there is a lot of uncertainty. We've had a lot of uncertainty associated with the pandemic, but really the situation we're in right now is just as uncertain. Supply chain disruptions that we experienced during the pandemic have improved, but they're not quite where they were prior to the pandemic. Inflation is high, and it's been much more persistent and stubborn than what we had thought. And even though we are getting these very strong jobs reports, the concern is these strong job reports might force the Fed to be more aggressive, increasing the interest rates even more, and possibly increasing the risk of recession. So right now, the risk of recession seems pretty high, but it's not a certainty by any means. So as we kind of look at where we're going over this next year, we kind of see a job market seems to be strong. It's likely to continue to be strong, but there is some uncertainty about kind of where we might be, particularly next year. Okay, so that concludes my my presentation, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mike. We're watching for some to come through on the chat. We'll give it a second. It was interesting to see all the data kind of laid out in a different way. I feel like a lot of that, I've seen a lot of articles and news and press on it, but it was nice to see it all in one place. I appreciate that. What are some of the questions you're hearing from others about the data that you're seeing now?
Well, one of the things that I think is on people's mind foremost is what's going on with the recession. Could we be moving into a recession? And there's a lot of people who've speculated, well, maybe we're already there. I don't think we're there because the job market has just been so strong. In fact, we've seen some of the strongest jobs reports that we've seen over the last few months, really strong growth in employers' payrolls. So I don't think we're there. And I don't think it's by any means a certainty that a recession is going to occur. We see a lot of people kind of giving odds. And some people are saying, oh, well, there's a 50% chance of us being in a recession within the next year. And it's hard to really say, whether we're going to go that route or not. What a recession could mean is that the economy slows down a bit. But it seems likely that it would be a relatively short recession. And it would be a relatively mild recession because there are so many things that are still kind of improving in terms of the economic situation.
We're starting to see some articles that large Fortune 500 companies are starting to do some layoffs. And in the past, we've seen that kind of trickle down even to the local economy. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so I think, part of what's been happening in terms of when we have been looking at kind of the on top numbers, we may be missing some of what's going on with specific firms. So firms can actually see very different situations depending on their economic situation. So for example, while the economy may be doing well overall, some firms may be experiencing problems. We're hearing about like Peloton, for example. It was the darling during the recession because everybody wanted a Peloton bike. But now as people have kind of gone back to the gyms, there's not as much demand. And so they'd ramped up production. And so individual companies might have different types of individual situations. And so they can create kind of disruptions in the local labor markets. So if we had a Peloton, manufacturing firm here, we might start seeing layoffs from that type of a situation. The good thing is, though, that the general economy tends to be pretty strong. So, while it's horrible when a worker loses a job like that, this is a much better time for them to be out there trying to find a job than if it happened, during a recession like, in 2009.
Sure. Do we have any from the online audience? Okay, I'm gonna ask Lindsay to go ahead and use her mic there.
The online question is, are Kentucky's numbers trending similar to our bordering states?
Yes, generally we tend to see fairly similar patterns, partially because we're very interconnected to them. So for example, we think about our manufacturers and we think about, companies that might supply them goods and services. Some of those will be in Kentucky, some of those might be in Indiana or Tennessee. And so we're all pretty interconnected. And so we all tend to move together. There are some differences. But if you look at them in a whole, we tend to follow along with our border states fairly closely.
Any others from the online group? I have one other for you, Mike. So a lot of times with our career clients, we'll hear folks say out in the community like, oh, it's hard to get a table at a restaurant because there's not enough servers, or that there's, quote, maybe not enough people who want to work. But the data that you have up on the screen here shows that the labor participation rates are very similar to what they were pre-pandemic. Can you speak to that?
Well, they're still lower than where we were pre-pandemic. They've come back substantially, but not as much. But also demand has been particularly strong in a lot of different sectors. And so they've been unable to find workers. So, with a lot of these workers who maybe had filled those positions before, they're finding other job opportunities. So, you might have been, working as, wait staff somewhere. But when a manufacturing firm's struggling to find workers, they may be able to pick up that worker and train them and offer them better wages. So we are seeing kind of these differences as we move across sectors. And that's part of why you're seeing such high raises for restaurant workers.
Mhm.
So, we still seem to be seeing kind of those issues. And the other thing, that's going to kind of evolve here is, and we saw this during the pandemic, is businesses are adapting, right? When they saw that, okay, well, we can't, have, in restaurant dining, they adapted. They all went online, and every restaurant seems to have some kind of an app or something where you can order. Restaurants are going to be figuring out, businesses are going to be figuring out if they can't hire workers, how do we adjust our business? And so what this does is it may mean that they use technology to kind of complement the workers they do have, make them more productive or able to wait more staffs. I've been to restaurants where, you basically have that little kiosk sitting on your table that makes it possible for the wait staff to maybe bus more tables or work more tables. And so, these businesses are going to adapt. And so that's going to address it as well. But it also means that there's going to be a change in demand for those workers.
And I think for the job seekers that we're working with, it means that their talent is more in demand and that their salaries, and the ones that I've worked with lately, are more negotiable than they've been maybe 2 or 3, 5 years ago.
I think that's exactly right. When we came out of the Great Recession in 2009, job growth was slow. Employers weren't hiring. And so, wages weren't going up as much. Now you have a situation where really workers are in high demand. There aren't nearly enough workers to meet the vacancies that are out there. And so what is happening is employers are doing a number of things, right? I mean, like I said earlier, they're increasing the wages. They're also looking at workers who maybe they might not have considered in the past. And this might mean that, okay, well, ideally I would have liked to have had this worker with these skills. Now I might be more willing to take a worker who doesn't have those skills and train them and invest in that worker. And so there are more opportunities to move across different types of occupations, possibly improving your financial situation, your work situation. So it's a really good situation, again, for those workers.
I think for the career changers in the room or online, I think that means now is a good time to think about what you could retool. Do you have, Mike, any other final parting advice for job seekers that are watching or participating today?
One thing I'd say, just kind of general, and this is something I would say, across the board, is be thinking about the skills that are in high demand, particularly the general skills that can be carried from one employer to another or one occupation to another. But also the technical skills. So I've gotten questions in different presentations about what jobs should we be training for? It's really hard for me to know what jobs are going to be in high demand, 5-10 years from now. But what I can tell you is that it's very likely that the demand is for workers is going to be high for those who have very technical skills, be those analytical skills, math skills, those types of things, so, accounting, bookkeeping, healthcare skills, those are all skills that are going to be in demand. So, invest in those types of skills, be careful about, or purposeful in terms of how you think about what skills you want to invest in.
We have a question from the audience. Say it here and I'll repeat it for the online group. Sure. Mike, the question is, what are your thoughts on the trends for remote and hybrid work?
Okay, that's a big question. Covers a lot of different areas. One, I think it's great. It certainly creates some opportunities and some challenges, I think, for both employers and for workers. But remote work has really opened up a lot of options. It used to be very much that your job had to be very specific to where the location of the employer was. You had to be, live near where your employer was. And that's no longer the case. And so we have a much broader labor market. If you are in an occupation where remote work is an option, you don't have to, Lexington is not your labor market anymore. You can look for jobs in a number of different areas. And so that's really great. What we've kind of seen is that with the pandemic, remote work, of course, as we all know, ramped up substantially, but it's kind of slowed. I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to be a permanent fixture there. But I think, we kind of, the pandemic forced us to kind of adopt the technology and the resources for remote work much more quickly than what we might have otherwise done. But I don't think we're going back. I think it's going to be around, and I think it's going to create great opportunities for both employers and for workers. But it is going to be a little bit harder to kind of manage those workers. It's going to be a little bit harder to kind of figure out, how do you pay two workers where one works remotely and one works in the physical building? Do you treat them the same? Do you treat them different? And that can be really different if you're looking at a job that's located in New York, where you have to pay high wages to attract somebody to be in the office. But you can hire somebody from Lexington who doesn't have those same, cost of living expenses. So employers are going to have to figure out how to deal with that.
Any other questions from the live audience online? All right, Mike, I think you did such a great job of breaking down some really complex data to show us what it means for our job seekers on the group. Big thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, we're going to continue in our program and move on to job leads next. Any employers with active job leads that are in person, make your way to the podium now. For those that are online, please use the raise hand feature now, and we'll give you audio privileges. If you prefer to email them to us, you can email us job leads by lunch today at jobclub@uky.edu, and we'll include them in our post-meeting job list. I see Nicole's brought up some job leads. Come on up, Nicole.
All right, thank you, Amanda. So once again, I'm Nicole Waite with Steps Employment here in Human Resources at the University of Kentucky. And so I have 3 job leads for you guys. And as Amanda has mentioned, I'll go ahead and send these before I leave today so that we have those available for you later. So the 3 positions that we have right now, let me mention there are more than 3, but 3 of the top positions that we have right now that we're recruiting for: a STEPS payroll associate, and that's actually in our HR building. And then we have a STEPS admin assistant, and this is part-time in our legal clinic. And then we have a STEPS IT support specialist position. Actually, let's see here. The first 2 positions are open through the 25th. And then that last position, the IT support services, that's open, kind of rolls. And so that one's open, though, through October the 31st. And so, as I mentioned, we will have these posted, shared with Job Club. And feel free to go on our website. There are many, many more. I just wanted to mention these. All righty. If you have any questions, feel free to.
Follow up.
Oh, thank you. Yes. And so, of course, you can reach me via email. It's just fine at nicole.waite@uky.edu, and that's WAITE. And if you're here in the audience, of course, you can get a card from me. And let's see here. Also, I don't want to fail to mention what STEPS is. As I mentioned, it is temporary employment, but although it's temporary employment, we do have part-time and full-time positions available. And if you do work in a full-time position, you do qualify for medical, dental, and vision insurance at the university. So want to be sure to mention that to you guys. And again, feel free to reach out. All righty. Thanks. Thanks, Amanda.
All right, thanks so much, Nicole. How about the online audience? Do we have any virtual hands up? Okay, not today. For those that are just logging in, or for those that are new to the group, be sure to watch your email this afternoon that you registered for the program with, or that you put onto the sign-in sheet in line when you came in. We'll be sending out a digest of job leads that we received since our last meeting. A whole bunch of jobs have come through in the meantime. Be sure to join our LinkedIn group in the meantime. Sometimes it happens that employers will contact us and the job lead is going to close. They'll no longer be taking applicants by the time for the next job club session. So we try to post as many as we can into our job club sharing community on LinkedIn. So be sure to check that out. Okay, quick updates from job club facilitators, news and programs. Diana, anything from Extension you want me to share? No? Be sure to check out Fayette County Cooperative Extension programming. Contact information here is on the screen. They have fantastic classes and programs. Definitely check those out. We just heard from Nicole Waite with UK Steps, a great way to get on in employment with UK. And then with Alumni Career Services, we're still actively taking Job Club clients. So if you're in need of some more support than Job Club provides, we do offer resume reviews, interview assistance, anything related to the job search for life and active members of the Alumni Association. So we'll share some information in the chat. And for those that are in person, if there's anything I can do to support, feel free to hang out afterwards and we'll chat. Okay, next time at Job Club. We'll meet again on September the 27th. How to become a Job Club whisperer, effective strategies to engage employers. This is presented by Kimberly Wickert over in the Retain program with the Human Development Institute. We're excited to have her join us. And so we'll see you then. On behalf of the Job Club team, the Alumni Association, Fayette County Cooperative Extension, and UK Steps Temporary Employment, thank you so much for logging into Job Club today. We'll see you next time.